And so now the question becomes whether or not they can bury the hatchet on the personal stuff. All right, welcome in. This is the Breer Report for Friday, August 16th. And I want to start today with the big picture of what we're going to be looking at with our three topics. And they all involve big box contract situations with star players. And there's an overriding thing that's happening here across the NFL and really something that's been unfolding for the entire offseason. And it doesn't seem like it's a mistake or a coincidence that all of these things are happening at once. On one hand, you have new union leadership. DeMaurice Smith is gone. Lloyd Howell is in. And if you want to look at the backgrounds of the two, DeMaurice Smith was a lawyer by trade. Lloyd Howell is a businessman by trade. So what's the difference? Well, you can see it in the way that they're speaking publicly about league matters, and that DeMaurice Smith was far more combative, like a lawyer would be publicly in his dealings with the NFL, where you see Howell taking a more conciliatory tone and how he's speaking about the state of the game. That said, you see some things happening in the background here again with players that don't seem like, when you put them together, they're happening by coincidence all at once. Here's what I mean. Generally, you won't see players go in with 2-3 years left on their contract and push for major raises, adjustments, extensions. And yet this year we have seen that. We saw it with Christian McCaffrey in San Francisco. We're seeing it with Trent Williams in San Francisco. We saw it with Matthew Stafford, 3 years left on his deal in Los Angeles. More guys are going in with multiple years left on their deals looking for contract adjustments. Well, what's the logic on that? The logic on that is, if I have a non-guaranteed year left on the back end of my contract and I'm not performing up to the level you want me to performing to, you're either going to make me take a pay cut or you're going to get rid of me. So while I have the leverage to ask for a raise, I should do it. And if it becomes more commonplace around the league, there's going to be more pressure on teams to do those sorts of things, which is why you see Matthew Stafford, a couple of years after Aaron Donald got a raise with 3 years left on his deal, getting money moved around so he could get a raise with 3 years left on his deal, which is why Christian McCaffrey could go in and say, I'm grossly underpaid. I don't care what position I play based on the impact I'm having on the team. I should be making more than $12 million this year. He gets a nice $4 million bump. And then Trent Williams sees that happen with one of his teammates and now feels justified going in and looking for his own raise as maybe the most important, most indispensable player on the Niners roster. Bottom line is, players seem more willing to do more drastic things to go and get contract adjustments. And we haven't just seen that with those guys I mentioned that had multiple years left on their deals. We've seen it with guys that are coming up for contracts. And that's where we're going to dig into our topics for today. And the first topic concerns Brandon Aiyuk and where his situation stands and where it's going. And, I think for a while now, this has been a little bit sideways between Aiyuk and the team. And combative is probably one way to put it. It is not where it was 2 or 3 months ago. And I think as frustration has increased on both sides, you have a situation where the team has started to say, okay, let's find closure, which is why they reopened trade talks with teams for the first time since the draft, which is why they allowed Brandon Aiyuk to go out and negotiate contracts with other teams. The idea was, okay, you want something closer to what Justin Jefferson is making. And Justin Jefferson is making 25% above what the previous market for receivers had been. Let's see how close you can get. And the closer you get, let's see if you can match the football situation you have in San Francisco. So New England, Cleveland, Pittsburgh all show interest in trading for him. New England offers him over $30 million per year, but that isn't nearly as good a football situation for him as San Francisco. Uncertainty at quarterback, uncertainty with the head coach. Not a great football situation for Brandon Aiyuk. He doesn't want to go there. It doesn't matter what the price is. They're out. Then you have Pittsburgh. Pittsburgh's offer comes in at a little bit under $28 million. So right around where that market for the Jalen Waddles and the Amon-Ra St. Browns was. And so at maybe around 27.7, it is more than what San Francisco is offering. And they have won more recently than New England has. And they have been a consistent winner. They do have a proven head coach, but they haven't won at the level that San Francisco has won. And they don't have the certainty that San Francisco has a quarterback. So now Brandon Aiyuk has to weigh that number at around 28 million versus something that was a couple million less in San Francisco instead of the much bigger number in New England and what was considerably less in San Francisco. And the hope was for the Niners, who always wanted to keep him as a player, that this would push him back to the table. And that's exactly what happened. And so now the question becomes whether or not they can bury the hatchet on the personal stuff, and whether or not this had gotten to the point where the differences that emerged personally out of the professional dispute can be mended, and can be mended to the point where he's willing to take a similar deal to stay in San Francisco in a better football situation than go get a fresh start in Pittsburgh. And so ultimately, I think the Niners do wind up keeping him. I think it was smart to approach it this way, that when it got to a point of tension, that they did things to try and find closure and force a conclusion. And that leaves the Niners now in a spot where they may have a shot to keep him long term and pair him with Brock Purdy long term, which is huge for the Niners when you consider where they are at the skill positions with George Kittle well into his 30s, with Christian McCaffrey at running back. Again, he's more than just a running back, but with the tread on his tires of a running back who's now going into his seventh NFL season. Those guys aren't going to be around forever. Debo's been beat up. He's going into a contract year. He's going into the final 2 years of his contract. You look at these guys, and it's like, who's going to be the number one guy 3-4 years from now? It's a lot easier to see Aiyuk being that guy than the others, which is part of the reason why they always intended to keep him. Second topic I want to hit, another receiver who's been dissatisfied with his contract, but this has been a friendlier situation, I think is the way to put it, than the Brandon Aiyuk situation. I can give you a scene setter from my training camp trip. With Aiyuk, when I saw him at camp, he was on a golf cart about 30 yards from the practice field with a bucket hat on, looking a little disinterested. And I think it would be naive to not believe a lot of this stuff was intentional in the way that they were conducting themselves. Jamar Chase is a different story. Jamar Chase was engaged with his teammates. He was helping younger receivers. He's been in the meetings. He's been involved on every level football-wise. He's just not practicing. And so where does that leave Jamar Chase with the Bengals? Well, the Bengals have had some frustration with this one. And their frustration revolves more around the fact that they haven't been able to get engagement from his side in trying to do a contract. Well, why wouldn't Jamar Chase's side engage the Bengals on a contract? I think it's a couple things. Number one, the Justin Jefferson deal, again, has had an effect on all of these. CeeDee Lamb also. And it's not just the $35 million he got, it's that gap between him and what the other young receivers got, what Devontae Smith got, what Jalen Waddle got, what Amon-Ra St. Brown got, what Nico Collins got this offseason. All of those guys in the $25 to $28 million range. You have this guy who's 25% above all of them at 35. So then the question becomes for Brandon Aiyuk, for CeeDee Lamb, for Jamar Chase, how close do you get them to Jefferson? Are any of them worth what Jefferson got? And with Chase, you have the added dynamic that that's one of his best friends. And so my understanding is that they, as you'd expect, obviously, those two have been in contact over the course of the offseason. Those two have worked with one another. And while the Jefferson negotiation was going on, there wasn't a ton of negotiation between Chase's people and the Bengals. Obviously, the logic there would be that Jefferson, with only 1 year left on his deal, Chase has got 2 years left on his, would have more leverage to get something done and to break new barriers. And so, my impression of it back in the spring was Chase isn't going to do anything until Jefferson does his deal, and then he's going to want more than Jefferson. The Bengals side of this would be, well, you haven't been quite as productive as Jefferson. You have 2 years left on your deal, not one, which means you've got less leverage in this situation than Justin Jefferson did. So yes, we'll do your deal early, but we may not go to the lengths that the Vikings did with Jefferson. Of course, Chase doesn't want to hear that. So where does that leave you? And why would that mean that, it might cause things to get a little quiet because the Ayuk and Lamb deal could clarify things further. Now, Ayuk's situation, um, I don't think he's going to wind up getting, at least this offseason, close to what Jefferson got. And I think part of that I think a big part of that is the road that he's gone down and the choices that he's made to prioritize winning. Um, may cause him to do something long term in San Francisco or take less from Pittsburgh than he would have taken from New England. Chase is different. Chase is in a winning situation. Chase has got 2 years left on his deal. Chase hasn't pushed the issue. He's not going into a contract year. So he can wait on CeeDee Lamb. He can wait on Brandon Aiyuk. And if those situations don't turn out the way he likes, then he can wait another year. And then he will be in the same situation Jefferson was. And I think a lot of people would tell you that he's just about as good a receiver as Jefferson is. And so I think my feeling on it at least would be that they aren't going to get something done until we get further clarification on the receiver market. We get further clarification on what that gap is going to look like at the end of training camp, at the end of preseason, when the games start to count. Like, where is the receiver market? What does that gap between Justin Jefferson and everybody else look like? And like, yes, Tyreek Hill got an adjustment. Yes, AJ Brown got an adjustment. But if you look at the way their contracts were adjusted, it's a different deal because those guys had multiple years left on their contracts than what Chase is asking the Bengals to do. So I think if you're a Bengals fan, watch what happens with Chase or watch what happens with Ayuk, watch what happens with Lamb, and then know that the marker for Chase is going to be Jefferson. My third topic here is the Matthew Judon trade. He gets traded from New England to Atlanta. New England gets a great return. Most teams that had been in the Matthew Judon market thought the market for Judon would be a fourth or a fifth round pick. He's a really good player, 32 years old, in a contract year, coming off of torn biceps. That's why most people felt like the fair return for Matthew Judon would probably be a day 3 pick. So the Patriots were able to get a little bit more by waiting this out. And the reason why you wait this out if you're the Patriots is other teams are going to want to see their young players in training camp. Other teams need to see other injury situations develop. So in Atlanta, they have a pass rusher. They draft, he gets hurt. In Arizona, BJ Ojulari, their second round pick from a year ago, he gets hurt. He's out for the year. In Chicago, right? Like, you have Montez Sweat on one side. They've had a pass rusher need on the other side. They've been talking to Yannick Ngakoue. When they get a couple of weeks of camp under their belts, what does that look like? What do guys like DeMarcus Walker look like? How does that whole situation look opposite Montez Sweat? Now they're in Denver. They've gotten to look now at guys like Baron Browning and Jonathan Cooper. Like, what does their situation look like? So by waiting, they were able to let some more desperation develop across the league, which allowed for them to get a third round pick. If you're the Patriots, I think the way you look at this is it's not about how good Matthew Judon is right now. It's about whether Matthew Judon is still going to be on your team when you get good again. And the answer to that question, because he was in a contract year, because of his age, was no. And so he becomes one of the expendable parts. And the writing was on the wall with this a little bit. Like, I think both Matthew Judon and Devon Godchow got their back up a little bit when Christian Barmore got what he got, based on the way that those two guys have conducted themselves the last couple of years and led the last couple of years and played on a down-to-down basis on the last couple of years. Godchow gets a contract adjustment. Judon was offered one. That doesn't work out, so they go to the market and get really, really good value in a third-round pick. Now they, as a rebuilding team, have 4 top 100 picks in the 2025 draft. As for Atlanta, this marks again where they are as a team. And where they are as a team is they're a team that feels like they're in a window to win right now, which is why you go out and sign Kirk Cousins. They feel good about the young skill talent they have. 3 top 10 picks at the skill positions. Kyle Pitts at tight end, Drake London at receiver, Bijan Robinson at running back. And their biggest need right now is for a pass rusher. And I look at it this way. This is sort of the price you pay for drafting Michael Penix 8th overall. Because I do believe if that pick had not been Michael Penix, it would have been Leatu Latu, Byron Murphy, Dallas Turner, someone who would give them some juice for their defensive front. They have their own injury up front with a guy they drafted in the third round, lose him for the year. And they come back now with a guy who's been one of the top 10 or 15 pass rushers in the league. They add him to the group. So that makes up for not taking 1/8 overall. That makes up for the injury they had on the defensive line. And this shows like that they're willing to go all in for right now because Matthew Judon isn't signed beyond this year, and because he is 32 years old, because maybe you can't count on him being a premier edge rusher for you by the time Michael Penix is the quarterback. So this is about the Kirk Cousins era Falcons. This is about right now. And they further drive that point home by signing Justin Simmons, which, I mean, you look at their secondary now with Justin Simmons, Jesse Bates, and AJ Terrell, and they've got a chance to compete. So you've got those guys in the back end. You've got Grady Jarrett and Matthew Judon on the front end. You've got an established offensive line that tackle to tackle should be really good. And you've got a top 10 pick at each of the skill positions with a veteran quarterback pulling the trigger. The Falcons are very much in win now mode. The last 48 hours proved it, and they're justified to feel that way because there were points last year where it felt like if the quarterback position had been in better hands, they easily could have won the NFC South and maybe even made some noise in the playoffs. That's it for this week. Thank you for tuning into the Breer Report. We'll be back right here, same place you found us next week.